delighted to welcome back to Dartmouth Jeffrey Kirsch, who was valedictorian of the class of 2009 and who wrote a splendid senior thesis that won every prize the English department offers. It was entitled Et in America Ego. You have a wonderful argument about the ways in which the very structure of the Scarlet letter through the three scaffolding scenes recalls, if it doesn't refigure, the city on the hill topos. Is one of the organizing principles, not only of your argument, but also of, let's call it, American typology. The city on the hill, when it manifests itself in the scaffolding scene, which is also the sentencing scene, the execution of legal sentence, and would also seem to be a site in legal terms of the exception to the rule of law that allows for the full force or violence of the law to manifest itself alongside the form of the law. Do you see the law, in so far as it itself is a wild figure? It itself embodies what you're describing as the full force of the violence of the wilderness, at the same time as it contains within it the desire to establish a coherent, utterly civilized, and utterly, let's call it, correct world. Is the law also a figure of the wild when it functions as a site of exception?
You mean in the way that the scaffold functions? I see the scaffold as more of the paradigm of the civilized world, or as the epicenter of it. Boston itself in the Scarlet Letter is the city on a hill that Winthrop described, but within that city, the scaffold seems to me the epicenter, or a city on a hill in its own right. It stands elevated above the marketplace, where the eyes of all people are upon Hester and Dimmesdale, and their story is made a byword throughout the world by virtue of being seen. It's the most visible spot in the entire novel, in contrast to the place in the woods that they meet, which is the polar opposite. It's low, it's secluded, it's hidden. So I guess I see the scaffold or the law as a site of exception is more of a pole in its own right than a mediating presence.
But the scaffold undergoes a transformation in the narrative. So far as in the first scene, we see the law execute itself completely. She is placed within the scaffold and must bear the full force of the law. But in the second scaffold scene, Dimmesdale, who is supposed to be the personification of the law, speaks a truth, speaks what could be called the underside of the law, that cannot be rendered coherent with the form of law. And the only figures who bear witness to that are Hester and Pearl. And then in the final scene, when Dimmesdale confesses that he is actually not the bearer of the, let's call it the true form and perfection of law, but everything that desire for perfection has disavowed. Hasn't that whole series complicated the notion of law as functioning as a, let's call it, stable pole that would be in opposition to the forest? Has the forest, when Dimmesdale speaks after having gone through that ordeal, is the forest itself speaking through the law when Dimmesdale renders that?
He's bringing that new knowledge that he's gained to the public. He's returning it to civilization. Yes, I suppose that's right. And it's interesting to think of the second scene on the scaffold as well, when he and Hester and Pearl are standing there in the middle of the night in complete darkness, looking at the meteor in the sky. And it's as if that is another time at which they can speak truth to one another because the law is no longer visible, as if the law relies on its visibility for its force. It relies on the awareness of everyone else in the community that someone is being punished there, that a crime has been committed.
It's sort of working the other side of regeneration through violence. It's regeneration through the revelation of violence, and that revelation releases you from the need to render it unconscious, which is what you're describing as a form of wisdom.
And in Dimsdale's case, it's a violence that he's inflicted upon himself in the form of the letter on his flesh.